Thank you, and very happy to be here. I'm standing between you and the coffee, so no pressure. Huh? So bear with me, you know.
Can I help just set it up here?
No, it's fine. So just put it to something else.
Yeah, sure.
I want to take you through some information around what's the status of freedom of expression, both in the world and then having a particular focus on Europe and European Union member states. You know, so we can actually think what are the issues that we're talking about. We're talking about solidarity. We're talking about civil society organizations and in which context they're actually operating, because it's not as nice as it looks when you actually start looking into the data and where we're actually going, you know. So I also will try to drop some provocative comments to then think for yourselves as to where do you want to take those forward, you know. So a couple of preliminary questions. Solidarity, what is solidarity and why do we bother? I think I'm very happy that you've placed expression at the center of this, how you nominate this meeting, which is Europe Talk Solidarity. So the essence of solidarity goes through expression. And if you have an environment where there's no freedom of expression, solidarity is not going to take place. You know. Why media freedom matters? Because there has been so much criticism against the media, and I think we need to really think carefully where this criticism comes from and for what interest. You know, journalists bring us closer together to understanding the world and people's stories, like tourism and renting accommodation and housing issues, like the colleague said. You know, so limiting press freedom deprives us all of knowing what's actually happening. And that knowledge is essential for solidarity. And my third question is why governments, specifically autocrats, you know, or as we used to say in the 70s, you know, dictators, you know. Now it's that we come up with politically correct, clean words, you know, like liberal democracy, you know. So if you see the word democracy with an adjective, start doubting as to whether it's democracy, right? So why governments, especially autocrats, fear the media? It's very simple. It's because they make them accountable, and they don't want this. So the tactic of autocrats is to sow divisions in populations. The old divide and conquer strategy, still shockingly effective on the others. And when you look at the others, from these autocrats, from these dictators, they always tend to be people in lower positions of power, whether these are marginalized groups, whether these are ethnic groups, sexual minorities, minors, etc. So if you're in doubt about the autocratic tendencies of your government, think for a moment how they are dealing with the media. Think how they are treating media, particularly independent media that are exposing corruptions into there. So we talk about freedom of expression, freedom of the media, right to information, but can we really measure the state of freedom of expression in the world? I think yesterday somebody said that solidarity cannot be measured, you know, and I would gently push against that. You know, there might be ways in which you can actually start defining what solidarity is and how to start measuring how much solidarity there is in societies, you know. So until recently, it was presumed that freedom of expression was impossible to measure. You know. This lack of data meant that we didn't know how many people actually have freedom of expression and who doesn't. You know. So in Article 19, it's the organization I work for, which is an organization that works for freedom of expression and right to information. We came up with this global expression report, you know, that brings data from the varieties of democracy institutes that the previous colleague data showed in terms of the democracy, quality of democracy was presented before, you know. And we try to really then looking at trends both global, regional, and national, And it's based on 25 indicators from these varieties of democracies indicator that we can actually able to score 161 countries and track their progress. Items, let's see, actually. So what we have categorized. So you see there on this corner, we have categorized countries in 5 categories. Those that are open, those that are restricted, so less restricted, restricted, and highly restricted, and then countries in crisis. So in this way, we are able to know how many people are able to express themselves, to communicate, to participate in society, to receive information from the state, whether they are posting online, taking to the streets, investigating the information. Yeah. And part of these metrics, actually, they look at different indicators. So it could include government censorship, internet censorship, civil society repression, freedom from political killing, harassment of journalists, freedom of discussion of men and women, freedom of academic and cultural expression. So when you think in terms of freedom of academic expression, it's about, you think back into universities where you are actually discussing about, well, this should be a safe space and we should not be talking about this. I would strongly push against that. There's no safe debates. Debates are ugly and you need to engage. And the right to protest. So what these trends are actually telling us is that more than half of us globally are now living in a country that is in full crisis of expression. So you can actually look at the countries. So we said, what are the countries that are under an expression category? You see 39 countries in crisis, but you actually look at the population behind those countries, you see that more than 53% of the population is actually looking in that. And one of the reasons why this shift, because this tendency of more countries in crisis and all the indicators constantly deteriorating in terms of freedom of expression in the past 2 decades, the last country that really tipped at the balance was India. And you can actually take a look at how India did perform. And people see more or less that, yeah? You can actually see how India was more or less into the 60% and has dropped into the 19, And this is thanks to Modi, since he became Prime Minister in 2014, So not all politicians are the same. Let's also break some of these mantras, all politicians are like, no. There is a huge difference between different politicians and what the policies they're actually talking about. Don't focus on the person, focus on what they actually do during the government. So through Modi, we saw the highest number of internet shutdowns. Curiously, those internet shutdowns were actually linked to the elections. The more closer to the elections, the more internet shutdowns. The more protests, the more shutdowns. Muslim journalists, independent media, political opposition, etc., etc. I want to turn into a much more positive picture, which is that of Brazil, that we saw an example how a democratic election, I think we need to nuance now, because I keep hearing in the media there's elections in Nigeria. No, there are no elections in Nigeria. What we have is a sham of a process controlled by the government. So I think we should drop talking about elections unless they are truly democratic according to a fair and level playing field. So in Brazil we had a very good performance throughout the decades, and then you can see the deterioration by Bolsonaro on how his policies led to internet shutdowns, criticizing the journalists, creating an environment in which harassing and killing journalists was seen as positive. And with Lula back into government, coming up with policies that has led into improvement in 17 of the 25 indicators that I mentioned before. So he reopened the processes for creating policies with massive participation. He reopened the transparency document, the transparency mechanism. He created a ministry for indigenous population, a ministry of human rights, and minister of women. You know. I want you to keep that image of Brazil, but because when we're going to talk about another country, I'll come to that one. Yeah, so keep that into your head. You know. So let's really look into regions, and I would like you to take you through Europe and Central Asia. So we have about half of the population in Europe and Central Asia lives in open countries, and a third live in crisis. So you can actually take a look at how Russia is performing, and you can actually see how Russia was not necessarily bad in the 2000s. I mean, it was already a bad picture, but you can actually see the deterioration of Russia all the way down. You know, the same goes to Belarus, with swapping, dropping into from the elections down, or you can actually look at Turkey with with Erdogan in terms of internet shutdowns and massive takeover of the media. So there is an environment when you actually think in terms of society, civil society organizations, an environment in which youth leaders can actually participate. You need to consider this. We had a previous discussion about where the youth in the future will be. So we need to take into consideration where this youth is actually operating, in which circumstances, and how can we engage with them in supporting their fight. And Ukraine, which is actually doing very bad. Obviously you have the context of war, but it was already quite bad in terms of different aspects of the indicators. So let's look at the European Union, because I think when you actually look at the European Union, it looks better. Can anybody remind me how many countries in the European Union there are? 27. Thank you. So we have, of the 27, 20 are in the open category. So that means that we have 6 that are in the less restricted category, and we have 1 that is restricted. So if we look back at 10 years in the European Union, we have had a constant decline of all the indicators. We have 18 countries that saw declines in private freedoms and political freedoms. We had 17 countries that saw declines in media freedoms. 15 countries saw declines in digital rights, and 13 countries saw declines in civic participation and civil society organizations. So I want to talk about and look into some countries by regrouping them in 3 areas of concern. One, it will be around the lack of media diversity and plurality. The second will be journalists under threat. And the third is limiting the right to protest. So when we actually look at the first area, which is media diversity and plurality, I think I want to talk about 3 countries: Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia. So obviously Hungary, yeah, you can actually see how it was an open category, and then you see again how the arrival of dictator Orban has, since 2010, undermining media pluralism, independence, turning the public broadcaster into a propaganda machine, and silence private media. He effectively controls 80% of the media in Hungary. He's been spying on journalists using Pegasus. I don't know if anyone knows what Pegasus is.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. And he has established a new sovereignty protection officer. So he wants to protect the sovereignty by attacked individuals considered as a threat to national sovereignty. So but you can guess who those are, those who actually oppose his views. And he also passed a propaganda law banning the promotion and portrayal of homosexuality and gender change in public education, media, advertisement, and commercial activities. So that's pushing the LGBT community to silence and non-visibility. Let's look into Poland, because it's also a very complex picture, Again, another country that had, open status for a long decades since the returning to democracy. But Poland saw the largest decline across Europe and Central Asia, across 15 indicators. So the country moved sharply. You can see the drop there. You can see the line, how the drop it goes. And that's when the Law and Justice Party arrived, dismantling the public media and the rule of law. Yeah. So it's very interesting to see how that ranking has risen slightly this year with the new government elected, not because there's a new government, because what is that government actually doing? And we saw trying to reverse the anti-democratic trend with announcement of far-reaching reform of the public media, the judicial system, and the decriminalization of defamation. Yeah. So the question is this going to be a small peak and then we're going to see a further down in terms of media freedoms in Poland? Or are we going to look into a Brazil scenario, the picture I said before in terms of them being able to come out? Yeah? And with all the respect to the host country, we need to have a conversation about Slovakia. Yes? And a very serious one, So in Slovakia, since assuming the office last year, the government of the Prime Minister, Robert Fico, continues to increase its control on Slovakia public media, taking proposals aimed at dismantling the radio and television of Slovakia, attacks on critical and satirical media. So if you see politicians getting really nervous about attacking satirical media, then that's your indicator. Yeah, yes. That's what they fear most, being laughed at. Yeah? Yes. So we really need to protect satirical media. They are the epicenter of democracies, and they might be shocking, disturbing, offensive. We need to protect them. You start by politically correcting, censoring satirical media, and that's where these things start going to go down. The Prime Minister called Fico hostile. The Prime Minister Fico called hostile at television on Marquisa because they have been actually going after him, meaning exposing his public policies and having a debate about those. And last but not least, we had a murder in this town of Jan Kuciak, which was an investigative journalist. There's still no justice for him. Why Jan Kuciak assassination is so important is because this was an investigative journalist, and he was putting his noses into schemes involving prominent business figures suspected ties to Prime Minister Robert Fico and organized crime. So as a result of that, he and his partner got killed. The assassination shocked the country, led Fico at the time to resign, he and his cabinet. Here we are 6 years later, Fico is back in power, and justice still not being done. Yeah. So where is Slovakia going to go? Is it going to remain in this 81% when we have very, very autocratic politician really going at the checks and balances of our democracy in order to make sure that there is no criticism against him? You can see where this is going to go. You can look at other countries in the region and then pose yourself the question, are we Slovakia in this level here? Are we at this point? Where do we want to go as a society, and where do we want to go? I'm going to speed up. The second area I wanted to talk about was legal harassment of journalists. We need to talk about Italy. because Italy is a country with serious problems. Again, the picture is deceiving because you look at Italy, it looks green, right? But we have, you know, a very problematic picture, you know, where we have seen in a steady decline in years with unprecedented attacks and violations initiated by public officials to attempt to silence critical voices. You know, I was part of a mission in Italy in May, as you know, on behalf of the European Union, and what we saw was very clear political interference with the public media, changing the audiovisual electoral rules favoring Prime Minister Meloni, and the failure to decriminalize defamation. So who leads on defamation is Prime Minister Meloni, against whom? Roberto Saviano. Roberto Saviano made a great book exposing in Gomorra the in and outs of Ndrangheta, his links to the politicians and other organized crime. You know? So we have here a politician, a prime minister, going after the key journalist in Italy that is exposing corruption. So where is Italy going to go? And I had more points on Greece, but I can raise those later on. You know. And the third thing I wanted to talk, and I think this is one of my main areas, is the right to protest. You know, and how we very clear trend on how the right to protest is being limited. Once France, where we saw preliminary entry bans on all Palestine solidarity protests. So in France, apparently we cannot demonstrate that on solidarity with Palestine. You know. So are we completely nuts, or what's happening here? So there are certain things we can actually demonstrate about, and some others not. No, we should be talking about whatever we want. We should be protesting about whatever we want, whether this is disturbing, shocking, or offensive. If you find yourself in front of expressions from other people that are disturbing, shocking, or offensive, my recommendation is have a cup of tea. Relax, think, and then if you disagree, think how you're going to counter that expression that's so disturbing, shocking, or offensive. This is what democratic debate is. We also saw we had pro-independence riots in New Caledonia, which is an overseas territories of France. You know, so the prime minister just decided to censor TikTok. So TikTok for a whole week was not there. You know, it's a completely disproportionate measure. And then Germany, another country that is extremely worrying. You know, in terms of which one? Yeah, that's.
It's not worrying.
You can always go to Denmark. Yeah. I think that the top is Switzerland, or they keep competing each other. You know, in Germany, and I'm saying this because Germany is a democratic country, has a long-standing tradition of democratic values and pushing for those. You know, but precisely because it's Germany that we're talking about, we should not be tolerating that. You know. Several protests in solidarity with Palestine are banned preemptively. Yeah? So you have a number of restrictions of freedom of expression imposed by the Minister of Interior. So we have one politician telling 87 million people what it is that they should be talking about, because the demonstration is going to use the phrase "from the river to the sea." Or is that shocking? Does this offend you? Does this disturb you? Have a cup of tea, think, and debate about what's actually happening in Israel and Palestine. Let's talk about the right of Israel to defend itself. You know, let's talk about the crimes against humanity that's happening or not happening in Israel and Palestine. Let's have a discussion around those issues. You know, democracy needs to discuss things that disturb. You know, and my appeal to you, as youth leaders, is to foster this environment in which we need to debate. There's no safe debate. No, we cannot discuss this issue. No, if somebody says we cannot discuss this issue, let's roll up our sleeves, maybe have a cup of tea and engage. Yeah, because we need to actually discuss this. Otherwise we can go to North Korea and then we will only be talking about how great our leader is. So that's what I wanted to say. Look forward to any questions if there are time, and if not, the participation in the working group this afternoon. But thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Very, very complex and maybe hard to digest a presentation that opened up a lot of really, really important questions, especially when we are thinking about shaping the public opinion and narrative around especially alternative forms of youth participation, and very, very critical points with the smothering maybe some protests and boycotting and showing solidarity through these alternative ways of participation. Yes, we do have time for a couple of questions. I see a couple of hands raised. Please do have in mind that we still need to buzz a little bit for a couple of minutes, and please do take into consideration that you will have 14-minute time to go into deeper comments and deeper conversation with David for Solidarity Labs. And I please do encourage you to keep your questions short and concrete. Thank you so much. Yeah, David, please keep your...
Maybe take several questions at the same time?
Yeah, and then you can... Yeah, sure. 2 or 3.
It's pretty quick. Could you share your notes for Greece?
Yeah, you can do this.
You are very welcome to open this page and take upon any country that you are interested in.
Right after.
My question is, as when I look into the infograph, without deeper information, I get really puzzled how Argentina can be on the 15th position of the rank with the same points as Canada, and way up when compared to the Netherlands. With my knowledge of the situation of the 3 countries, which is not very deep, I wonder why and how this happens. Also, just some comments about this, because the question is mostly about what is the criteria then to define freedom of expression and of speech. And then also, like I understand some of your points of view. I even support all of them or most of them. But there's one thing that I think we enter the ideological and dogmatic field, which is, I understand when you argue in defense of the freedom of speech and the freedom to protest and to manifest. And when you give the example, for example, of Palestine and France, and I'm in favor, but states have suppressed freedom of speech for a long time if they feel that it's dangerous for them. Nazis, they cannot protest or manifest themselves on the streets, they will be suppressed. There's no freedom of expression for this group of people. There are other groups of people, hooligans in football, other groups. Europe, for example, censors Russian media, and me personally, I'm totally in favor of that in some sense. So these mechanisms, they belong to the interest and to the daily activities of states, and the essence of states. So it's basically then we fall into the ideological and dogmatic field. So then how do you define this criteria is my question.
Thank you. David, can I have one more?
Yeah, go here.
Yeah. Please, it's so difficult to decide on make this my job really.
Thank you.
Harder than it is.
Thank you, David, for very nice and very true reflection of Slovakia, what's going on here. My question is, I fully understand your point about protesting. But people are tired of protesting already in Slovakia, to be honest, because protests are going on for months here, and the impact is very, very small. I mean, nothing is really changing, so people are living in disillusion, and they are not willing to protest anymore. They are losing their motivation. So my question is, how do you see the near future of Slovakia within the field of free media? How do you see the development? Whether you see it positively or negatively, and maybe in your opinion, what needs to be done or what needs to change that the situation develops in a positive way? Thank you.
Okay. Are we through with Roger? So,
No, but I'm gonna leave them to you at 2 o'clock.
you could argue censorship or your freedom of expression on questions. You know. Couple of issues. You know. This data is the 2024, so it reflects the situation in 2023 when you actually compare Canada, Netherlands, and Argentina. You know. The data is gathered through 25 indicators, as I said before, by the varieties of democracy that pertain to different elements of freedom of expression. Of course, it can be shocking to see Argentina that high. You know, what this actually, you're not. Well, we need to then look deep into Argentina, but also in Netherlands and also in Canada, that have come up with highly restrictive legislation on digital issues and censoring internet, you know, or limiting online harms, or various defined vague concepts that actually are limiting citizens in the Netherlands, in the Canada, in which what kind of access to information is, you know. But make no mistake, where Argentina is actually going with relay, you will clearly see that reflecting the 2025 data. You know, that's very, very clear. You know. But more issues for discussion. How do you find international freedom of expression? Article 19 of the International Civil and Political Rights Covenant. You know, so we look back at that definition of human rights and actually look at that. You know, there should be limitation of expression when it's incitement to genocide, when there is incitement to violence, discrimination of hostility with a probability of that happening. So the bar is very high in terms of what actually you are limiting it on. So I think that demonstrations of Nazis should not be banned. Yeah, should not be banned. Let's have a cup of tea, reflect, and see how we're going to counter argument that. Yeah, let's see how it is that we can actually push back. You know. I think that Russia today should be allowed to freely broadcast. You know, and let's actually push back against it, because the side effect of that is that most of the international outlets in Russia have been banned. Yeah, so this is a zero-sum game that nobody's going to win. You know. So we need to have very robust democracies that are able to engage with debates, yeah, and actually, see Russia today and then not being fooled about it, you know, because it's so gross propaganda that it's the same thing as, I don't know if you watch Chinese television international, you know, it's a bit of a joke, you know. On Slovakia, I'm not positive, yeah, I'm not positive also because if people in Slovakia are waiting for the European Union to act, you know, you look at Hungary, yeah? The European Union is a machine of lower common denominator consensus, and they have let the ball drop. Even Tusk has let the ball drop when we were criticizing Hungary, you know. So Hungary is a clear dictatorship, you know. Hungary is not a liberal democracy. Hungary is a dictatorship, it's not, there's no way to define that, Why it has not been expelled from the European Union? It wonders, and then the European Union talks about values, So the mechanism, we have seen how the European Union has been very slow to react to dismantling of the rule of law in Poland. So I think if people are tired of protest and the impact is small, I think it would be interesting to see whether that's going to transform into political action for one way or another. Yeah. So we have, for example, in Madrid, we had the anti-crisis demonstrations that went on for months and months and months, and then that movement decided to transform itself into local communities and start actually taking other types of actions. So we need to look at what's going to be the transformation of those protests into a viable political platform that can actually challenge future into the elections. So those will be my answers, and we can discuss more in the working group.
Thank you, David. Once more.